My beloved child. Stop for a moment. There are days when the world grows so loud that even the quietest truth struggles to find its way into your heart. If these words have reached you today, imagine them as the opening scene of a story that was waiting for the right reader. This is not a coincidence within the story, it is the beginning of a journey that asks you to look beyond what your eyes have been able to see. Somewhere, while you believed nothing was changing, another chapter was already unfolding. The person who had spent so long convincing themselves that distance was the safest answer carried an invisible weight through every ordinary moment. They smiled when expected, spoke when necessary, and continued walking through familiar streets, yet every step echoed with questions they could no longer silence. Then something unexpected happened. It was not a close friend. Not a family member. Not someone who knew the history between two hearts. It was a stranger. Someone who had no reason to interfere, no knowledge of old conversations, broken promises, or silent prayers. Yet sometimes the most unexpected voices become mirrors, reflecting truths people have tried desperately to hide from themselves. The encounter lasted only minutes. But those few minutes became impossible to forget. The silence that followed those unexpected words settled over them more heavily than any argument ever could. They walked away from the stranger, but every step felt slower than the last, as though the road itself had begun asking questions their heart had avoided for far too long. They tried to convince themselves it was meaningless, just another passing conversation that would disappear before sunset. Yet the stranger's calm expression lingered in their memory, returning again and again until it became impossible to ignore. For the first time in a long while, they stopped running from their own thoughts. The excuses that had once sounded convincing suddenly felt fragile. Pride had built walls that looked strong from a distance, but inside those walls lived loneliness that had quietly grown deeper with every passing day. That evening, the sky seemed unusually still. The wind carried a strange peace, and the ordinary sounds of life faded into the background. They found themselves remembering moments they had tried to bury, the conversations that ended too quickly, the smiles they never admitted they missed, and the countless times they almost reached out but allowed fear to win instead. Each memory arrived with greater clarity than before. They remembered laughter that once made ordinary days unforgettable. They remembered promises spoken with complete sincerity before doubt slowly found its way into both hearts. They remembered believing that time would erase every feeling, only to discover that some connections refuse to disappear simply because they are ignored. The stranger's words echoed once again. What if staying away is the only mistake you will never be able to fix? Those words were never shouted. They were spoken gently, almost like someone describing the sunrise. Yet they carried more weight than criticism ever could. Something inside them shifted. Not dramatically. Not all at once. But enough to make them question everything they had accepted as permanent. Elsewhere, completely unaware of this unfolding change, another heart continued carrying its own quiet burdens. Days had become routines, routines had become habits, and hope had learned to whisper instead of speak loudly. There had been moments when giving up seemed easier than believing anything could ever change. Still, deep within that quiet heart, one small light refused to disappear. It had grown faint. It had been tested. It had survived disappointment. But it remained. That small light had no explanation. It simply continued shining, reminding them that not every story reaches its conclusion when people believe it has. Sometimes the greatest chapters begin after everyone assumes the ending has already been written. As the night grew deeper, unexpected events continued unfolding beyond either person's awareness. Tiny moments that seemed insignificant on their own quietly began aligning like pieces of an unfinished picture. A familiar song played unexpectedly. A forgotten photograph appeared while searching for something completely unrelated. An old message was discovered by accident after months of remaining untouched. None of these moments forced a decision. Instead, they invited reflection. Reflection became remembrance. Remembrance slowly became courage. For the first time in what felt like forever, they allowed themselves to imagine a different future, not one built upon fear, but upon honesty. Yet honesty is never easy. It asks difficult questions. It exposes hidden motives. It reveals the difference between protecting your heart and imprisoning it. That realization became impossible to escape. The stranger had disappeared long ago, yet their brief presence continued changing the direction of countless thoughts. Sometimes the people who alter our lives are not those who remain with us for years. Sometimes they simply arrive for a single conversation before quietly disappearing, leaving behind a truth that refuses to fade. As midnight approached, sleep became impossible. Every attempt to distract themselves failed. Books remained unread. Television became meaningless background noise. Conversations felt empty. The heart wanted answers that only honesty could provide. Finally, they whispered words no one else heard. What if I have been afraid for too long? The question lingered in the darkness. No immediate answer came. Instead, another memory appeared. It was a memory of kindness. A memory of forgiveness. A memory that reminded them love had never been perfect, yet it had been real. And real things possess remarkable endurance. They survive storms. They survive silence. They survive seasons of misunderstanding. Even when buried beneath disappointment, they continue waiting for the right moment to breathe again. That realization brought unexpected tears. Not tears of regret alone. They were tears of awakening. The kind that arrive when someone finally stops pretending they no longer care. Far away, without realizing why, the other heart suddenly paused during an ordinary evening. A feeling impossible to explain settled quietly within. Nothing dramatic happened. No voice spoke. No miracle interrupted the moment. Yet peace briefly replaced uncertainty. It lasted only seconds. Still, those seconds felt strangely meaningful. Neither heart understood why that calm appeared at exactly the same time. Neither realized their separate journeys were slowly beginning to move toward the same destination. What neither of them knew was that someone from the past had quietly noticed these invisible changes. This person carried a forgotten piece of the story, a truth that had remained hidden for much longer than anyone realized. And before another sunrise arrived, that hidden truth would begin revealing itself in a way neither heart could have imagined. The next chapter would change everything. Morning arrived without ceremony, yet something about the light felt different. It spilled across familiar streets with a quiet warmth, as though the world itself was patiently waiting for a choice that had not yet been made. Neither heart knew that the ordinary hours ahead would carry extraordinary meaning. Life often disguises its turning points inside the most ordinary moments, and this day would prove no different. The person who had been holding back for so long tried once again to convince themselves that everything would become easier if they simply kept moving forward without looking back. They dressed for the day, followed familiar routines, greeted familiar faces, and spoke words that sounded confident enough to fool everyone around them. But confidence can sometimes become a carefully crafted mask, hiding questions that refuse to disappear. Every quiet moment invited another memory. Every pause carried another reminder. No matter how hard they tried to focus on work, conversations, or responsibilities, their thoughts returned to the stranger's unexpected words. Those few sentences had uncovered emotions buried beneath months of silence. They realized that distance had never erased affection. It had only hidden it beneath fear. At the same time, the other heart sensed a subtle change they could not explain. Nothing visible had happened. No message had appeared. No unexpected phone call interrupted the day. Yet an unfamiliar feeling gently replaced the heaviness that had settled inside for so long. Hope returned carefully. Not with loud promises. Not with certainty. Only with a quiet whisper that refused to leave. It was enough to make them wonder whether every unanswered question truly had an ending waiting somewhere beyond today's uncertainty. As the afternoon unfolded, an unexpected conversation began somewhere neither of them anticipated. Two people who barely knew either of them happened to speak about missed opportunities, forgiveness, and the strange ways life reconnects those who believe every bridge has already burned. Their conversation was ordinary. Yet its meaning reached far beyond either speaker's understanding. Sometimes truth travels through unexpected mouths before arriving exactly where it is needed. Elsewhere, another forgotten detail quietly returned. While searching through old belongings, a small keepsake slipped onto the floor. It seemed insignificant at first, a simple reminder from happier days, but the moment it rested in their hands, every wall built around the heart began to weaken. They remembered the laughter. The dreams. The promises made with complete sincerity. Most of all, they remembered how safe it once felt to simply be understood without needing to explain every emotion. Tears threatened to fall again. This time they did not resist. There comes a moment when healing begins not because pain disappears, but because pretending finally becomes more exhausting than honesty. That moment had arrived. Across town, another heart paused for reasons it could not describe. A familiar place appeared unexpectedly during the day's routine, awakening memories long believed forgotten. The surroundings had changed very little, yet everything felt different because time had quietly transformed perspective. Standing there, they whispered softly, almost without realizing it, "If another chance truly exists, I hope I recognize it." The words disappeared into the breeze. No answer came. Yet peace remained. As evening approached, invisible threads continued drawing both lives toward a meeting neither expected. Small delays altered schedules. Unplanned decisions changed directions. Tiny interruptions that once would have seemed frustrating quietly became part of a much larger design. Neither person understood why the day refused to unfold according to plan. Neither realized that every delay was gently guiding them towards something neither had anticipated. Then another surprising event occurred. The stranger who had spoken those unforgettable words happened to cross paths with someone connected to the story once again. This meeting lasted only moments, yet it revealed a single truth that carried tremendous weight. The greatest mistake is believing that love disappears simply because people stop speaking. Those words reached new ears. This time they struck even deeper. Questions that had remained buried suddenly demanded honest answers. Regret began transforming into courage. Fear slowly surrendered to possibility. For the first time in many months, they stopped asking whether reaching out would make them appear weak. Instead, they asked a different question. What if remaining silent is the only thing keeping both hearts apart? That single thought changed everything. The decision was not fully made. The message had not yet been written. The distance had not yet been crossed. But something far more important had already happened. The heart had stopped running. Night settled gently across the sky, carrying with it an unusual calm. Somewhere beneath countless stars, two people looked toward the same heavens without realizing they shared the very same unanswered hope. One believed the story was almost over. The other quietly sensed it might finally be beginning again. Neither could imagine that before another day had completely unfolded, an unexpected revelation from someone who had witnessed everything in silence would emerge. One hidden truth capable of rewriting everything they believed about why they had been separated in the first place. And when that truth was finally spoken aloud, neither heart would ever see the past the same way again. The following morning carried an unusual stillness, as if time itself had slowed to witness what was about to unfold. Neither heart understood why the day felt different, but both sensed that something long hidden was quietly moving toward the surface. Sometimes the greatest turning points arrive without thunder. They come wrapped in ordinary hours, waiting for someone brave enough to notice them. The person who had spent so long hiding behind silence could no longer escape the truth. Every excuse that once sounded convincing had begun to lose its strength. Pride no longer felt like protection. It felt like a prison they had built with their own hands. As they sat alone for a few moments, another memory returned. Not because they searched for it, but because it refused to remain forgotten. They remembered a promise made during a simple conversation long ago. It had not been dramatic. It had not been surrounded by grand declarations. Yet it carried a sincerity that time had never managed to erase. I hope that even if we lose our way, we'll never stop believing that kindness can lead us back. Those words echoed through their thoughts like a quiet melody. For the first time, they wondered whether that promise had been waiting patiently all along, hoping to be remembered. Across the city, the other heart found themselves staring out a window, watching people pass by without realizing how many unseen stories surrounded them. Every stranger carried hopes, disappointments, unanswered prayers, and silent victories. That realization brought unexpected comfort. Perhaps they were not alone after all. Perhaps countless hearts had stood exactly where they stood now, uncertain, hopeful, afraid, and yet somehow still willing to believe that tomorrow might hold something different. The feeling lingered. It grew stronger with every passing hour. Meanwhile, someone else quietly stepped into the story. It was a person who had witnessed pieces of the past without ever becoming part of it. They had observed misunderstandings grow larger simply because neither heart knew the full truth. They had remained silent for months, believing it was not their place to interfere. But silence can sometimes protect confusion instead of peace. And on this day, they decided that silence had lasted long enough. Their message was simple. It carried no accusations. No blame. Only honesty. I think both of you have believed things that were never completely true. Those few words became the beginning of something neither heart expected. Questions quickly replaced assumptions. Memories were examined from a different perspective. Events that once seemed painfully clear suddenly revealed hidden details that had gone unnoticed. One misunderstanding led to another. One unanswered question became 10. Then came the realization that changed everything. Much of the distance between them had not been created by a lack of care. It had been created by fear, timing, and conclusions reached before either heart had heard the complete story. The discovery left them speechless. How many nights had been spent believing the worst? How many tears had fallen because of assumptions that were never challenged? How many opportunities had quietly disappeared because neither person believed the other still cared? Regret tried to take hold. But something stronger interrupted it. Hope. Hope reminded them that understanding always has the power to begin where misunderstanding ends. That evening, they found themselves standing in a familiar place they had avoided for a long time. Nothing about the location had changed. The same gentle breeze. The same quiet surroundings. The same peaceful atmosphere. Only one thing was different. Their heart. Instead of replaying old pain, they imagined what healing might feel like. Instead of asking why everything had gone wrong, they asked what might still be possible. It was a small change. Yet small changes often become the first steps toward remarkable journeys. Elsewhere, another heart experienced an almost identical shift without realizing it. They smiled for the first time in days. Not because every question had been answered, but because they sensed that unanswered questions no longer meant hope had disappeared. Sometimes hope survives simply because it refuses to surrender. Night slowly covered the sky once more. The stars appeared brighter than usual, quietly reminding anyone willing to look upward that darkness has never been powerful enough to extinguish every light. At that very moment, a phone rested only a few inches away. A message had already been written. Every word had been chosen carefully. Every sentence carried honesty instead of pride. One final breath was taken. A trembling hand moved toward the screen. Only one touch remained before months of silence would finally be broken. But just before that message could be sent, another notification appeared unexpectedly. The name on the screen stopped everything. It belonged to someone neither of them had expected to hear from again. And what that person revealed in the very first sentence would change the course of both lives before the night was over.